To the residents of a quiet West London street, the cloak-and-dagger world of espionage was only something they read about in newspapers or saw on the television, yet that world was a lot closer than they realised. A husband and wife from their street were living a secret life as a spy team. When police swooped on the couple's house, they found sophisticated coding equipment and enough evidence to convict both husband and wife of spying. The story took many twists and turns, including the possibility that the spy messages were beamed up to passing aircraft, and the security services were ultimately accused of a blunder that led to their spymaster escaping. The husband's name, according to him, was Brian Schulze, who came to Britain in 1980. The son of a freed German prisoner of war and a girl from Bristol, Brian had been born in the Cotswolds, but when he was 6 years of age, his family had returned to Germany, taking him with them. The boy and his father didn't get on, so Brian was left with a widowed aunt in West Berlin, where he went to school. In 1972, he fell out with his aunt and travelled to Vienna, studying at a polytechnic and then getting a job with a firm of interior decorators. His aunt died, and Brian was able to come to Britain in 1980 with a legacy of around £5,000. The husband had entered the UK in 1980 as Schulze with a West German passport, but hid his identity papers in the name of Brian Waldemar Strunze. The real Strunze had indeed been born in the UK after the war, to an English mother and German father. He'd gone to Erfurt Airport in the GDR and wasn't heard from again. In 1982, the man posing as Brian claimed he was on holiday in Dublin when he met a West German girl he alleged was Ilona Hammer. A few weeks later, the couple had married. Ilona, not her real name, was actually born in Rothe in Bad Tolz, West Germany, on March 19, 1949. An only child whose parents had died, she later moved to Leipzig. They both arrived in the UK and spent 5 years as a tenant of Bridget Ferris in a bedsit at No. 3 Pownall Gardens in Hounslow, before marrying again under false documentation and moving to this unassuming house at No. 249 Way Avenue, Cranford, rented from a Southall man from October 1984. Ilona, then 35 years old, took language classes and began working as a translator. Brian, who was 32, got a job as a designer of fitted kitchens. They seemed a perfectly normal young couple. Bridget Ferris had always known the husband as Brian Strunze. His rent book was made out in that name in his own writing. Ferris always believed him to be Austrian. He always made a point of saying he wasn't German. He stayed for about 3 weeks when he first moved in before leaving, returning 6 months later with Ilona. When the couple married fraudulently in October 1984, Bridget Ferris and her husband Albert were witnesses at Lambton Road Register Office. A reception was held at the Master Robert Motel on the Great West Road. The only other guest was Ilona's employer. Their names were linked by security services in Bonn to the defection to East Berlin of one of West Germany's top spy hunters, Hans Joachim Tiedg. Apart from the defection of Tiedg, the West German espionage scandal involved the exposure of 4 suspected communist agents in Bonn, 2 of them secretaries with access to top-secret information. Swiss police announced on the 28th of August 1985 that they'd arrested a couple living in Lucerne on suspicion of being East German agents after a tip-off from West German counterintelligence. Although security sources in Bonn linked the Schulze arrests to the Tiedg defection, Scotland Yard declined to discuss the background in view of the nature of the offences. Tiedg was head of counter-espionage work against East German agents in what was known as the Office for Protection of the Constitution, and it was believed he knew of operations against suspected agents in Allied states. Tiedg, who had a severe alcohol and debt problem, sought political asylum in East Germany in August 1985. At around tea time on August 23, 1985, a team of Special Branch officers raided the Strunze's house and arrested the couple. After close scrutiny of Brian Strunze's life story, it transpired that he was not who he claimed to be. After being questioned for 2 days, Brian and Ilona made statements in German admitting that they'd been living under assumed names and were actually East German citizens. Their stories had been legends, life histories either entirely falsified or taken from real people, albeit well rehearsed. The man known as Brian Strunze was in reality Reinhard Schulze, and he'd worked for the Hauptverwaltung Aufklärung, East Germany's intelligence service. His wife, whose real name was Sonja, was also working for the HVA. They had, the couple claimed, already been married when Schulze first came to Britain in 1980. Reinhard and Sonja were separately charged under Section 1C of the Official Secrets Act with using a document, in this case a passport, against the public interest. Reinhard was further charged under the Criminal Administration Act with making a false declaration to obtain a British passport. He had a British passport issued on October the 7th, 1982, at the passport office in the name of Brian Valdemar Schulze. Sonja was charged under the Immigration Act with making a false statement to an immigration officer. She had in her possession a forged or altered Austrian passport issued on April the 1st, 1982, at the Austrian Embassy in Berlin in the name of Ilona Hammer. Charged under the Official Secrets Act, they appeared at Horseferry Road Magistrates Court on Wednesday the 28th of August 1985. During their brief one-minute appearance, they remained silent, and after their solicitor Geoffrey Lewis didn't apply for bail, they were remanded in custody until they appeared again on September the 4th. They appeared once more at Horseferry Magistrates Court on the 4th of September 1985 and were remanded to appear next at Bow Street Court. Information of what was found at the Schulze's home during a month-long search and what it may have been used for was revealed in the trial hearings at the Old Bailey in 1986. It was revealed in court on the first day of the trial on June the 30th, 1986, that in the couple's garden shed, investigating officers found an air freshener cylinder. Taped into the hollow base of this were tiny devices, which, according to experts, represented a sophisticated and unbreakable system of coding information. Better known to you and I as one-time pads, they were the size of postage stamps. In the Schulze's house, officers found a high-powered radio which was used to receive coded shortwave messages from East Germany. They also discovered a block of A4 paper on which forensic scientists were able to make out the indentations of several rows of five-figure numbers. 2/3 of one of the pads had been used up, and the pad had 50 blocks of five-figure groups per page. There was also a tape cassette on which were recorded all of one five-figure group and the start of another in Morse. GCHQ later identified some of the messages to be identical to the ones they'd received prior. The Schulzes received regular messages which were impossible to break, but experts detected a call sign in the blocks of numerals. Investigators ripped apart furniture and tore up the floorboards of the house. Codes and false identity documents were found hidden all over the property. Another important discovery was a brown holdall which constituted an escape kit. There were 2 brown envelopes, the first containing money and a false British passport, with Reinhard Schulze's photograph in it in the name of a British businessman, Philip Beattie. The second envelope contained more money and a forged West German passport to be used by Sonja Schulze in the name of Cornelia Hildegard Fischer. The envelope also contained a blank wedding invitation card. Possibly the Schulze's escape plan included them having to leave Britain to attend a wedding. The real Mr. Beattie was a businessman whose work often took him to Eastern Bloc countries behind the Iron Curtain, including East Germany. When their financial situation was scrutinised, they had a lot more money than their employment history showed, suggesting that they were receiving money for their clandestine activities. In some cases, £2,000 to £3,000 had been deposited into their bank accounts immediately after they returned from trips abroad via East Germany. On the third day of the trial, the prosecuting barrister Michael Hill QC slumped in his seat with heart problems and was rushed to hospital. It transpired that while living under the cover of normality provided by stolen identities, the Schulzes worked as middlemen. By means of dead letter drops, they collected information gathered by other East German agents, who they almost certainly would have never met face to face, and passed it along to the HVA and vice versa. Though a radio was found in the house with which the couple might have received messages from East Germany, no means of transmitting information back was discovered. However, 2 possibilities were raised. Reinhard Schulze owned a desktop computer which may have been used to make high-speed transmissions down telephone lines. Another possibility was raised by the nearness of the Schulze's house to Heathrow Airport, and a map found in the house which appeared to have flight paths in and out of the airport drawn on it. There were also maps with flight paths to and from Stansted, Gatwick and Manchester airports. It was suspected that the Schulzes somehow transmitted their information to East German and Russian airliners flying overhead in the form of densely packed burst transmissions. There was some doubt over what their target would have been, though it has been suggested that the spy ring for whom the couple acted as a middleman may have been out to discover details of the European Ariane space project. Throughout their trial at the Old Bailey in July 1986, at which they didn't give evidence, Reinhard and Sonja Schulze remained courteous and attentive. They pleaded not guilty to committing acts preparatory to communicating information useful to an enemy. Their defence claimed the allegations against them were a mishmash of facts and speculation, and that there was no evidence that they had access to classified information, had approached any embassies, left secret material at dead letter boxes, or had transmitted radio messages. Whatever their target, on July 10, 1986, Reinhard and Sonja Schulze were found guilty. The vetted jury of 8 men and 4 women took just under 4 hours to reach their verdict. The couple each sent to prison for 10 years. A recommendation was made that they be deported after serving their sentence. It's been suggested that the Schulzes were betrayed by Oleg Gordievsky, who had in fact been a double agent since 1966, passing on information to officers of MI6. He was the UK's top KGB spy and would have certainly known about the Schulzes. Within hours of Gordievsky's defection, a number of vital figures in Western intelligence circles vanished, reappearing in the East. The authorities decided to move quickly to apprehend the spies in West London before they too could flee the country. It never became clear who the Schulzes really were, why they were sent here with false identities and sophisticated spying equipment, and whether they'd ever sent any secrets back to East Germany or caused any damage to Britain. Although they found the Schulzes' name in an East German spy ring investigation in Bonn, their spymaster was never found because the police and security services swooped in too soon. Security chiefs dubbed him the Fox because his overlord was Markus Wolf, head of East German intelligence. His identity was known to MI5. He fled back behind the Iron Curtain only hours after the Schulzes were arrested. The GCHQ listening post at Cheltenham knew that an East German spy ring was being set up in London after picking up radio transmissions preceded by a code that was later found at the Schulzes' house. There was no surveillance, no phone tapping, or any attempt to find out who they were in contact with, and for this reason the investigation was labelled a blunder. The spy equipment wasn't found until 6 days after the Schulzes were charged, and so, by way of law, they didn't have to answer questions about these finds. In early December 1986, they applied for leave to appeal their sentences, still strongly denying they were involved in any espionage activities, but a judge denied them leave, stating that their sentences were correct. Reinhard was remanded at Franklin Prison and Sonja at Durham Jail's She Wing. In September 1989, the Schulzes had a lucky break. They were slated for exchange as part of an East-West German spy swap. The Home Office was accused of releasing them as a goodwill gesture towards German reunification, but this was denied. They were released on condition that they left the UK immediately in late 1990. This saga, as I've already said, posed more questions than it answered. The real identities of the Schulzes and what they were actually here to do was never established. I can only assume they disappeared back to their previous lives in Germany. Perhaps their details are in some Stasi file which was destroyed or fell into Western hands. Maybe Tidger could have shed some light on them during his retirement in Moscow, where he moved to after German unification. Oleg Gordievsky might have been able to as well, but he died on March 4, 2025. Tidger died on the 6th of April 2011, and the Schulzes would be in their 70s now.